Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the presence of control. In a world addicted to noise, reaction, and constant expression, silence becomes a rare form of power. Most people speak to be seen, react to be felt, and argue to protect fragile egos. The disciplined individual understands that silence is not weakness, it is restraint. It is the ability to pause when emotions demand expression and to remain still when the mind seeks chaos. Silence creates space, and in that space awareness is born. When the mind is noisy, clarity disappears. Thoughts collide, emotions escalate, and actions become impulsive. Silence brings order. It allows the mind to observe rather than react. This observation is the beginning of mastery. A person who cannot sit in silence cannot sit with discomfort. A person who avoids silence avoids self-reflection. That avoidance slowly turns into dependency on distraction, validation, and external approval. True strength does not announce itself. It does not need witnesses. The strongest presence in a room is often the quiet one, because silence forces others to reveal themselves. Loud behavior seeks control through dominance, but silence controls through calm. When someone insults you and you respond with silence, you deny them power. When chaos surrounds you and you remain quiet, you become the center of stability. Silence is not passive, it is intentional. Training silence is training the nervous system. It is teaching the body that not every stimulus requires a response. Most conflicts grow because someone reacts too fast. Most mistakes happen because someone speaks too soon. Silence interrupts this cycle. It allows logic to replace impulse. It allows discipline to override emotion. It transforms instinct into choice. In silence, you hear the truth about yourself. There is no audience, no mask, no performance, just thoughts, habits, fears, and intentions exposed. This is why silence is uncomfortable for many. It removes distraction and reveals weakness. But facing that weakness is the only way to strengthen it. Silence is a mirror, and many fear what they might see. Strength is built in these moments. Sitting quietly when the urge to escape appears. Breathing slowly when anxiety rises. Choosing not to speak when words could cause damage. This restraint accumulates. Over time, the mind learns patience, the emotions learn obedience, the body learns stillness. This is internal authority. Silence also sharpens perception. When you stop talking, you start noticing. Patterns become clear. Intentions become visible. You see how people behave when they are not being interrupted. You understand situations before they unfold. Silence turns observation into advantage. Those who master silence are not easily manipulated. They do not reveal their plans prematurely. They do not leak emotional energy through unnecessary speech. They conserve strength. They move deliberately. Their words carry weight because they are rare. When they speak, people listen because silence has prepared the ground. The path of discipline demands silence. Early mornings, repetitive training, long hours with no praise. Growth often happens quietly. Loud success is built on silent effort. The individual who understands this stops seeking attention and starts building foundation. Silence teaches humility. It reminds you that you do not need to comment on everything. You do not need to win every argument. You do not need to prove yourself constantly. Control is knowing when not to act. Power is knowing when not to speak. In silence, ego weakens and awareness strengthens. This is why silence is the foundation of true strength. Not because it hides power, but because it creates it. Not because it avoids conflict, but because it transcends it. Not because it is empty, but because it is disciplined, intentional, and controlled. Self-mastery begins with control of the mind because every action is born from a thought. Before the body moves, the mind decides. Before discipline becomes visible, it exists internally. A person may appear strong on the outside, but if the mind is uncontrolled, that strength collapses under pressure. The mind is the command center. If it is chaotic, everything it commands becomes chaotic. Most people live as prisoners of their own thoughts. They believe every thought is true, every emotion deserves expression, and every impulse must be followed. This is not freedom, this is slavery. An uncontrolled mind jumps from desire to desire, from fear to fear, reacting to the environment instead of directing itself. The first step toward mastery is realizing that thoughts are events, not orders. They arise, but they do not have to be obeyed. The disciplined mind observes thoughts without identifying with them. It recognizes anger without becoming anger. It recognizes fear without becoming fearful. This separation is power. When you can watch your mind instead of being dragged by it, you gain distance. In that distance, choice appears. Choice is the beginning of control. Training the mind requires repetition and patience. There is no instant mastery. Just as the body strengthens through resistance, the mind strengthens through challenge. Each time you resist a negative thought, you build mental muscle. Each time you redirect attention away from distraction, you sharpen focus. Each time you sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, you increase tolerance. These small victories compound. Focus is a weapon. In a world designed to scatter attention, the ability to concentrate becomes rare. The uncontrolled mind seeks constant stimulation. It avoids stillness. It avoids boredom. But boredom is not the enemy. Boredom is the doorway to depth. When the mind is no longer entertained, it is forced to confront itself. This confrontation refines awareness. Emotional control is not suppression. It is understanding. Suppression hides emotion until it explodes. Control acknowledges emotion and chooses response. When anger arises, the trained mind pauses. It analyzes the source. It questions the necessity of reaction. This pause transforms potential destruction into clarity. Reaction feels powerful in the moment, but restraint creates lasting strength. Thought patterns shape identity. What you think repeatedly becomes who you are. If the mind constantly feeds on negativity, comparison, and resentment, the life it produces reflects that. Changing life begins by changing thought. This does not mean positive thinking without discipline. It means intentional thinking, directing attention toward what builds rather than what weakens. The mind also controls perception of pain. Physical discomfort, emotional struggle, and hardship are unavoidable. Suffering, however, is optional. An untrained mind magnifies pain through resistance and complaint. A trained mind accepts pain as temporary and useful. This shift changes endurance. It allows continuation where others quit. Mastery of the mind creates internal stability. External conditions lose their power to shake you. Praise does not inflate you. Criticism does not break you. You remain centered because your sense of worth is not controlled by opinion. This independence is rare and valuable. Discipline of thought influences speech and action. When the mind is calm, words become precise. When thoughts are organized, actions become efficient. Waste decreases. Energy is conserved. Life becomes intentional rather than reactive. Control of the mind is not about perfection. Thoughts will still arise. Emotions will still appear. The difference lies in response. Instead of being owned by the mind, you become its guardian. Instead of chasing every thought, you select which ones deserve attention. This is leadership from within. True self-mastery does not require isolation from the world. It requires sovereignty within it. When the mind is controlled, chaos outside loses authority. Circumstances become challenges rather than threats. Life becomes a training ground rather than a battlefield. This is why all mastery begins internally. Without control of the mind, discipline collapses. With control of the mind, discipline becomes natural. Strength becomes sustainable. Direction becomes clear. And the individual moves through life with intention rather than impulse. Discipline is choosing long-term growth over short-term comfort. And this choice must be made daily, often moment by moment. Comfort is seductive because it offers immediate relief, pleasure, and ease. Growth demands effort, sacrifice, and patience. The untrained mind chooses what feels good now, while the disciplined mind chooses what builds strength later. This difference determines the direction of a life. Most people wait for motivation to act. Discipline acts without it. Motivation is unstable, influenced by mood, environment, and emotion. Discipline is a decision rooted in identity. When you identify as someone who trains, improves, and endures, action becomes automatic. You do not negotiate with comfort because comfort is no longer in control. Short-term comfort hides long-term consequences. Skipping training feels harmless in the moment. Avoiding difficult conversations feels peaceful. Choosing rest over effort feels justified. But these small decisions accumulate. Over time, avoidance becomes habit, weakness becomes normal, and potential slowly disappears. Discipline interrupts this decay by demanding awareness of consequence. Long-term growth requires patience. Results are rarely immediate. The body does not transform overnight. The mind does not sharpen instantly. Skill does not appear after a single effort. Discipline continues even when evidence of progress is invisible. This is where most fail. They abandon the process because reward is delayed. Discipline understands that progress often happens beneath the surface before it becomes visible. Discomfort is the currency of growth. Muscles strengthen through resistance. Focus improves through sustained effort. Character forms through challenge. Discipline does not seek pain, but it does not avoid it. It recognizes discomfort as a signal of expansion. Each time you lean into difficulty instead of retreating, you expand capacity. Comfort weakens awareness. When life is easy, attention dulls. When everything is convenient, effort becomes optional. Discipline restores sharpness. It wakes the body early. It trains the mind when it resists. It chooses structure over chaos. This structure creates freedom, not restriction. When habits are disciplined, decisions decrease and energy is preserved. Choosing growth often means saying no. No to excess. No to distraction. No to people and environments that weaken focus. This is not isolation, it is selection. Discipline protects energy by limiting unnecessary consumption. Time, attention, and effort are finite. Growth requires investing them wisely. The disciplined individual understands that sacrifice is temporary, but regret is permanent. The pain of effort fades. The pain of unfulfilled potential lingers. Discipline chooses the pain that strengthens, rather than the pain that corrodes. This awareness reframes hardship as investment rather than punishment. Daily routines reflect inner discipline. How you wake up, how you train, how you eat, how you speak, how you rest. These patterns shape identity. Identity shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcome. Discipline aligns these elements toward growth. Without discipline, life becomes reactionary. With discipline, life becomes deliberate. Comfort promises safety, but it often delivers stagnation. Growth demands risk. Risk invites uncertainty. Discipline provides stability within uncertainty. It becomes an anchor when motivation fades and conditions change. This stability allows consistent progress regardless of external circumstances. Choosing long-term growth also requires humility. It accepts that improvement is slow. It accepts correction. It accepts repetition. Discipline does not rush mastery. It respects process. It returns to fundamentals even when ego demands advancement. This humility prevents collapse. Over time, discipline reshapes desire. What once felt difficult becomes normal. What once required effort becomes habit. Comfort shifts. Growth becomes satisfying. Effort becomes familiar. This transformation is subtle but profound. The disciplined life no longer feels restrictive. It feels aligned. Every disciplined choice reinforces identity. Each time you act despite resistance, you strengthen trust in yourself. This trust builds confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet assurance that you can rely on your own word. This internal reliability is rare and powerful. Discipline is not intensity for a short period. It is consistency over a long one. It does not demand perfection. It demands commitment. Commitment to growth over ease. Commitment to direction over comfort. Commitment to becoming rather than remaining. Emotional control defines real power because emotions, when uncontrolled, dictate behavior without permission. Most people believe power comes from dominance, expression, or the ability to overwhelm others. In reality, power is the ability to remain steady when pressure rises. A person who cannot control emotion can be provoked, manipulated, and exhausted. A person who can control emotion cannot be easily shaken. Emotions are natural signals, not commands. Anger signals perceived injustice. Fear signals potential threat. Desire signals attraction. These signals are useful, but when followed blindly, they lead to reaction instead of intention. The disciplined individual listens to emotion but does not surrender to it. This distinction separates strength from volatility. Uncontrolled emotion shortens vision. In anger, consequences disappear. In fear, possibilities collapse. In desire, restraint weakens. Emotional control restores perspective. It allows the mind to remain active while emotion is present. This coexistence is mastery, feeling without losing clarity. Most conflict escalates because emotions move faster than awareness. Words are spoken that cannot be retrieved. Actions are taken that cannot be undone. Emotional control introduces a pause. This pause is not hesitation, it is intelligence. It creates space for evaluation. In that space, better decisions emerge. The ability to stay calm under pressure is a trained skill. It begins with awareness of internal states, recognizing the physical signs of emotion, tightness in the chest, rapid breath, increased heart rate. These signals indicate rising emotion. Awareness allows early intervention. Breath slows the body. Attention grounds the mind. Control is restored before reaction occurs. Power is often misunderstood as expression. Raising voice. asserting dominance, forcing outcome. These displays are usually compensation for inner instability. True power is restraint, the calm response, the measured word, the deliberate action. This restraint unsettles those who rely on chaos. It denies them leverage. Emotional control also protects energy. Emotional reactions are costly. They drain focus, disturb sleep, and cloud judgment. Carrying unresolved anger or resentment consumes mental space. The disciplined individual processes emotion without attachment. They experience it fully, then release it. This release preserves clarity and vitality. Control does not mean suppression. Suppressed emotion accumulates. Eventually it erupts. Control means expression with timing and purpose, choosing when and how to express emotion, selecting context, measuring impact. This intentionality transforms emotion into communication rather than destruction. In relationships, emotional control builds trust. People feel safe around stability. They listen to those who respond rather than react. In leadership, emotional control creates authority. Others follow those who remain composed in uncertainty. Panic spreads chaos. Calm spreads confidence. Training emotional control requires exposure. Avoiding emotional situations weakens resilience. Facing discomfort strengthens it. Difficult conversations, delayed gratification, situations that challenge ego. Each exposure, when handled with awareness, expands capacity. Over time, emotional tolerance increases. Triggers lose power. The ego resists control because it seeks validation through reaction. Being right, being seen, being dominant. Emotional control reduces ego influence. It shifts focus from winning to understanding, from reacting to resolving. This shift elevates interaction. External circumstances will always fluctuate. Praise and criticism, success and failure. Control over emotion creates internal consistency. Identity becomes stable. Self-worth becomes independent of outcome. This independence is freedom. A person with emotional control chooses response based on values, not mood. They act in alignment with principle rather than impulse. This alignment creates integrity. Integrity creates respect. Respect creates influence. Real power is not the absence of emotion. It is command over it. It is the ability to feel deeply without being ruled, to experience intensity without losing direction, to remain centered while the environment shifts. When emotional control is developed, fear no longer paralyzes. Anger no longer blinds. Desire no longer distracts. Emotion becomes fuel rather than fire, directed rather than explosive. This is the quiet strength that cannot be taken, the power that does not need permission, the stability that remains when everything else moves. Pain and hardship are tools for transformation when they are understood rather than resisted. Most people see pain as something to avoid, escape, or numb. They treat discomfort as an enemy. In doing so, they miss its purpose. Pain is information. It reveals limits, exposes weakness, and demands adaptation. When approached with awareness, it becomes instruction. Hardship removes illusion. Comfort allows denial. When life is easy, flaws remain hidden. When pressure is applied, truth appears. Character is revealed in difficulty. Discipline is tested in fatigue. Integrity is challenged under stress. Pain strips away excuses and forces confrontation with reality. The body learns through stress. Muscles grow only when pushed beyond familiarity. Bones strengthen under load. Endurance increases through strain. The same principle applies to the mind. Mental resilience develops through challenge. Avoidance weakens capacity. Exposure strengthens it. Pain, when measured and intentional, expands ability. Most suffering is amplified by resistance. The mind says this should not be happening. This resistance adds layers of frustration, fear, and self-pity. Acceptance changes the experience. Acceptance does not mean liking pain. It means acknowledging its presence without protest. This shift conserves energy and allows focus on response rather than complaint. Hardship also builds perspective. When you endure difficulty, trivial problems lose importance. Complaints quiet. Gratitude sharpens. Struggle clarifies values. You learn what matters when comfort is removed. This clarity guides future decisions. Transformation requires friction. Without resistance, there is no refinement. Steel is shaped by heat and pressure. The individual is shaped by challenge. Pain forces adaptation. It demands learning new skills, strengthening weaknesses, and developing patience. Each hardship carries a lesson. Ignoring it repeats the cycle. Learning from it advances growth. Fear of pain limits potential. Many remain in situations that weaken them because change appears uncomfortable. Growth demands leaving familiarity. That departure often involves uncertainty and discomfort. Those who embrace temporary pain access long-term strength. Those who avoid it remain confined. Hardship also teaches humility. It reminds you that control is limited. It reveals dependence on discipline rather than circumstance. This humility prevents arrogance. It keeps effort grounded. It fosters respect for process. Pain exposes attachment. When something hurts deeply, it reveals what you cling to: identity, expectations, outcomes. Observing this attachment allows release. Release reduces suffering. Freedom increases. Endurance is built through repetition. Each time you endure discomfort without collapse, you expand tolerance. What once overwhelmed becomes manageable. What once discouraged becomes familiar. This expansion creates confidence rooted in experience rather than optimism. Hardship also builds empathy. Experiencing struggle deepens understanding of others. Judgment softens. Compassion increases. This does not weaken strength, it refines it. Strength without empathy becomes rigid. Strength with empathy becomes grounded. Transformation is not immediate. Pain often precedes clarity. Confusion comes before insight. Fatigue comes before strength. Those who persist through the uncomfortable middle reach change. Those who quit early remain unchanged. The disciplined individual does not seek suffering, but they do not flee from it. They approach challenge with intention. They regulate exposure. They learn recovery. They integrate lessons. Pain becomes a training partner rather than a threat. Hardship also reveals commitment. When conditions are ideal, everyone participates. When conditions deteriorate, only the committed continue. This separation is not external, it is internal. It distinguishes desire from resolve. Each challenge survived becomes evidence. Evidence builds belief. Belief strengthens resolve. Resolve sustains effort. This cycle transforms identity. You no longer see yourself as fragile. You see yourself as capable. Pain reshapes priorities. It forces simplification. Energy is directed toward essentials. Distractions lose appeal. Focus sharpens. This focus accelerates growth. Transformation occurs when pain is used deliberately, when lessons are extracted, when resilience is built, when discomfort becomes familiar rather than feared. In this way, pain and hardship stop being obstacles and become instruments. Instruments that shape discipline, instruments that forge strength, instruments that transform the individual from within. Daily practice is the path to lasting mastery, because mastery is not created by intensity alone, but by consistency applied over time. Occasional effort produces temporary results. Repeated effort produces transformation. The body, the mind, and character respond to what is practiced regularly, not to what is attempted occasionally. Many people seek breakthroughs. They want sudden change, dramatic progress, and immediate results. This mindset ignores how mastery actually develops. Skill is built through repetition. Strength is built through routine. Clarity is built through daily alignment. Small actions performed consistently shape identity more powerfully than rare moments of motivation. Practice removes reliance on mood. When action depends on how you feel, progress becomes unstable. Some days enthusiasm is high. Other days resistance dominates. Daily practice bypasses this fluctuation. It establishes structure. You act because it is time, not because it feels good. This reliability builds discipline. The nervous system adapts to repetition. What feels difficult at first becomes familiar. Movements become efficient. Thought patterns become automatic. Daily practice rewires response. Over time, effort decreases while output increases. This efficiency is the result of accumulated consistency. Mastery requires presence. Repetition without attention becomes habit without growth. Daily practice, when approached with awareness, refines precision. Each repetition becomes an opportunity to adjust, improve, and understand. This refinement is gradual but powerful. The mind often resists daily effort because it prefers novelty. New experiences feel stimulating. Repetition feels dull. Discipline overrides this preference. It recognizes that boredom is part of the process. Boredom indicates familiarity. Familiarity precedes fluency. Progress in daily practice is subtle. Changes are not always visible. Strength increases quietly. Understanding deepens internally. This invisibility tests patience. Those who quit often do so because they cannot see immediate reward. Those who continue trust the process. Trust is built through commitment. Daily practice also builds resilience. Missing a day feels disruptive. Returning strengthens resolve. The individual learns to resume rather than abandon. This ability to return is crucial. Mastery is not the absence of interruption. It is the habit of continuation. Consistency compounds. Small efforts accumulate. 10 minutes daily surpasses hours once a week. The effect is exponential. Over months and years, daily practice reshapes capability. What once seemed impossible becomes routine. Practice also simplifies decision-making. When practice is scheduled, negotiation ends. There is no debate, no internal argument. The structure reduces mental fatigue. Energy is reserved for execution. Daily practice creates intimacy with the craft. You understand nuance. You sense subtle changes. You recognize error quickly. This sensitivity separates the trained from the casual. Mastery is familiarity earned through time. The disciplined individual treats practice as non-negotiable, not as punishment, but as alignment. Practice becomes a ritual, a grounding point, a reminder of commitment. This ritual stabilizes life. External circumstances will always change. Travel, fatigue, disruption. Daily practice adapts. It may shorten, but it does not disappear. This flexibility preserves continuity. Continuity preserves progress. Mastery is often invisible to others. They see results without seeing repetition. They admire outcome without understanding routine. Daily practice builds substance beneath appearance. This substance sustains performance under pressure. The reward of daily practice is not only skill, it is trust in self. Each completed session reinforces reliability. You learn that you can depend on your own word. This trust strengthens confidence. Over time, practice becomes identity. You are not someone who tries. You are someone who practices. This shift removes doubt. Action becomes natural. Lasting mastery does not arrive suddenly. It emerges quietly from thousands of ordinary days. Days where effort was made despite resistance. Days where practice continued without applause. Days where commitment outweighed comfort. This is how mastery is built. Not through dramatic moments, but through daily presence. Through repetition with intention. Through consistency that outlasts motivation. The path of self-mastery is not mysterious, and it is not reserved for a chosen few. It is built through silence that strengthens awareness, control of the mind that creates direction, discipline that chooses growth over comfort, emotional When the conscious mind rests, the constant noise finally fades. The voice that questions everything, analyzes every detail, and tries to control every outcome slowly becomes quiet. This is not weakness, this is access. The conscious mind is designed to protect patterns, not to create transformation. It keeps repeating what is familiar because familiarity feels safe, even when it is painful. Real change cannot enter while this guard is standing alert. It enters only when the guard steps aside. The subconscious does not argue. It does not ask for proof. It does not compare past failures with future possibilities. It absorbs. This is why moments of deep relaxation, stillness, and sleep are more powerful than hours of forced motivation. When the conscious mind rests, the subconscious opens like fertile ground. Whatever reaches it in this state becomes instruction, not suggestion. Throughout the day, the conscious mind filters everything. It decides what is possible and what is not based on old experiences. If something once hurt you, it marks it as dangerous. If something once failed, it labels it unrealistic. This filtering creates a narrow version of life where growth feels heavy and change feels distant. At night, this filter weakens. The mind stops defending old stories, and the deeper layer becomes reachable. The subconscious is responsible for habits, emotional reactions, self-image, and identity. It controls how you respond before you even think. That response was not chosen in the moment, it was learned long ago. Trying to change behavior while the subconscious remains unchanged is like steering a ship while the engine pulls in another direction. Effort increases, frustration grows, and results stay the same. When the conscious mind rests, the subconscious begins to listen, not to logic but to feeling, not to force but to repetition. This is why calm words, steady rhythm, and simple truths sink deeper at night than intense speeches do during the day. The subconscious does not respond to urgency, it responds to consistency. Most people try to change their lives by attacking the surface. They try to think positively while feeling unsafe inside. They try to act confident while carrying old fear in the body. This creates internal conflict. The subconscious always wins these battles because it controls energy, not just thought. Rest is the doorway where that conflict dissolves. In rest, the body softens. Muscles release tension they have been holding unconsciously. Breathing deepens. The nervous system shifts from survival to recovery. In this state, the subconscious is no longer preparing for threat. It becomes receptive to new direction. This is not imagination. This is biology working in harmony with awareness. When the conscious mind steps back, identity loosens. You are no longer defending who you think you are. This allows new self-perception to form without resistance. The subconscious does not need you to believe immediately. It only needs exposure. What is heard repeatedly in safety becomes familiar. What becomes familiar eventually becomes normal. What becomes normal becomes automatic. This is why effortless change always looks slow from the outside, but feels natural from the inside. There is no dramatic push, no internal violence. Old patterns fade not because they are fought, but because they are no longer fed. New patterns rise not because they are forced, but because space was created for them. When rest becomes intentional, it turns into training. Sleep is no longer escape, it becomes alignment. The mind learns without strain. The body follows without resistance. The subconscious reshapes the direction quietly, invisibly, steadily, adjusting perception, reaction, and expectation beneath awareness, forming a new baseline from which thoughts, choices, and emotions begin to arise without effort, without tension, without the need to convince, because the instruction has already been accepted at a level deeper than thought. Resistance is often misunderstood as strength. People believe that holding on tightly, pushing harder, and refusing to let go will protect them from loss and failure. In reality, resistance is the reason most lives feel heavy and repetitive. It is the silent force that keeps the same patterns alive while convincing the mind that effort alone will bring change. Resistance does not appear as fear at first, it appears as control. Control is the attempt to force life to behave in a predictable way. It comes from past pain, disappointment, and moments where trust was broken. The mind learns that surrender equals danger, so it builds tension instead. This tension feels productive, but it drains energy. Every time you try to manage every outcome, you create pressure between what is happening and what you want to happen. That pressure becomes frustration. Life does not respond to pressure. It responds to direction and openness. When you resist what is, you close yourself to what could be. Resistance narrows perception. It locks attention onto problems instead of possibilities. The more you fight circumstances, the more your identity becomes attached to struggle, and struggle starts to feel normal. Surrender is not giving up. It is releasing the need to fight reality in order to feel safe. When you surrender, you stop arguing with the present moment. This does not mean you approve of everything that happens. It means you stop wasting energy trying to deny what already exists. In that release, clarity appears. When resistance drops, the nervous system relaxes. The body no longer stays in a constant state of defense. Muscles soften, breathing deepens, and the mind becomes more flexible. In this state, solutions that were invisible before begin to appear naturally. Surrender creates space, and space invites movement. Most people try to surrender with the mind, while the body is still holding fear. True surrender happens when the body feels safe enough to let go. This safety is not created by thinking differently, it is created by stopping the internal fight. Once the fight stops, energy that was locked in tension becomes available for growth. Resistance keeps repeating the past. It uses old experiences as proof that the future must look the same. Surrender allows the present moment to stand on its own. It breaks the habit of projecting yesterday's pain onto tomorrow's possibility. In this openness, life gains room to reorganize itself. Balmalaban happens when you stop pulling against the flow of events. Like swimming upstream, resistance exhausts you without taking you anywhere new. When you turn and allow the current to carry you, movement becomes effortless. This does not mean you lose direction. It means direction becomes natural instead of forced. Surrender also changes how you respond to challenges. Instead of reacting emotionally, you respond consciously. You stop taking everything personally. You stop seeing obstacles as threats and begin to see them as information. This shift alone changes outcomes without needing external effort. When resistance fades, intuition becomes clearer. You start sensing when to act and when to wait. Decisions feel lighter because they are no longer driven by fear. You trust timing instead of trying to dominate it. This trust is not blind faith. It is awareness sharpened by stillness. Life begins to meet you halfway when you stop pushing against it. Opportunities that once felt distant start appearing without force. Conversations change. Circumstances shift subtly, not because you demanded change, but because you allowed space for it to occur. Surrender removes the internal barrier that was blocking flow, allowing energy to move freely again, reshaping experience through ease rather than effort, guiding actions from calm awareness instead of tension, dissolving struggle at its source, and opening the path where life can finally move without resistance. Repetition is the language of the subconscious. It does not respond to intensity or logic. It responds to what it hears and feels consistently. A single powerful thought during the day may inspire you, but it rarely rewires you. The subconscious learns the same way the body learns, through rhythm, familiarity, and exposure. What repeats becomes known. What becomes known becomes trusted. During waking hours, repetition struggles to reach deep layers of the mind. The conscious mind interrupts, doubts, and compares. It analyzes meaning and questions intention. This mental noise weakens repetition. At night, when the body relaxes and the conscious mind softens, repetition moves freely. There is less resistance, fewer filters, and more receptivity. This sleep is not a shutdown, it is a doorway. As the brain shifts into slower rhythms, the subconscious becomes more accessible. In this state, repetition does not feel forced. It feels natural, almost invisible. Words, sounds, and ideas slip past defenses and settle deeper than effort ever could. Beliefs are not chosen, they are installed. Most beliefs were formed before awareness existed. They were repeated by environment, experience, and emotion. This is why trying to argue with a belief rarely works. Logic cannot remove what repetition built. Only repetition can replace repetition. When you repeat calm, supportive messages during sleep, you are not trying to convince yourself. You are familiarizing the subconscious with a new pattern. Familiarity reduces fear. Fear is what keeps old beliefs alive. Once fear dissolves, the belief loses its grip. Repetition during sleep works because the emotional body is relaxed. There is no need to defend identity. The mind is not trying to protect old stories. In this softness, the subconscious absorbs without tension. It does not evaluate whether something is deserved or realistic. It simply receives. This is why transformation through sleep feels effortless. There is no internal battle, no pushing against doubt, no self-criticism. The change happens beneath awareness, where habits and reactions are formed. By the time you notice the shift, it has already become natural. Most people underestimate the power of small, repeated input. They look for dramatic breakthroughs while ignoring quiet consistency. The subconscious does not need drama. It needs safety and repetition. Gentle words repeated nightly can do more than intense effort repeated occasionally. As repetition reshapes belief, behavior follows automatically. You begin to respond differently without planning to. You feel calmer in situations that once triggered you. You hesitate less. You trust more. These changes feel like personality shifts, but they are simply new defaults being installed. Repetition also reshapes self-image. The way you see yourself determines what you allow into your life. When the subconscious repeatedly hears messages of worth, safety, and capability, it updates its internal map. Opportunities no longer feel threatening. Growth no longer feels overwhelming. This process does not require belief at the beginning. Doubt does not block repetition. Resistance does. Sleep removes resistance. This is why listening while falling asleep is more effective than affirmations spoken with effort during the day. Effort signals lack. Repetition signals normality. Over time, the subconscious stops distinguishing between inner voice and external input. What is repeated becomes internal dialogue. This new dialogue quietly influences perception, choices, and emotional responses. Life begins to shift not because you forced change, but because your internal environment changed first. Repetition during sleep is not about escaping reality. It is about rewriting the internal lens through which reality is experienced. When that lens changes, the same world produces different outcomes. You are no longer fighting old patterns. You are outgrowing them, allowing new rhythms to take their place, guiding actions from ease instead of tension, shaping identity from within, and creating transformation that feels natural, steady, and inevitable. The outer world is a mirror, not a source. Most people spend their lives trying to rearrange reflections without realizing what creates them. They chase better circumstances, different people, new locations, and improved outcomes, believing that once the outside changes, the inside will finally feel at peace. This approach keeps them exhausted because it reverses cause and effect. The inner state comes first, and the outer reality follows. Your inner state is made of emotional tone, self-perception, and expectation. It is not what you say you want. It is what you quietly assume will happen. These assumptions operate beneath conscious thought. They shape how you interpret events, how you respond under pressure, and what opportunities you even notice. Two people can experience the same situation and walk away with completely different results because their inner states are different. Hard work is often praised as the solution to everything, but hard work without inner alignment creates resistance. When effort is driven by fear, lack, or the need to prove worth, it produces tension. That tension leaks into actions, words, and decisions. People sense it. Situations respond to it. The work may be intense, but the results remain limited because the energy behind the effort is conflicted. When the inner state is calm and grounded, action becomes clean. There is no desperation attached to outcomes. You do what needs to be done without emotional weight. This clarity sharpens focus and improves timing. You say less but mean more. You move with precision instead of urgency. From the outside, it looks like things are falling into place effortlessly. The outer world does not respond to what you want, it responds to what you expect. Expectation is quieter than desire. Desire shouts, while expectation assumes. When you expect difficulty, you unconsciously prepare for struggle. Your body tightens, your perception narrows. You miss openings that don't match your expectation. When you expect ease, your system relaxes. You become receptive. Solutions appear because you are available to see them. This is why people who seem less skilled sometimes succeed more easily than those who work harder. Their inner state is not filled with resistance. They are not fighting themselves while moving forward. Their actions flow from confidence, not compensation. They are aligned internally, so the outer world cooperates. Trying to fix the outer world without addressing the inner state is like trying to calm water by hitting the surface. The disturbance increases. Real change happens when the source settles. When the inner state shifts, reactions soften. You stop over-interpreting setbacks. You recover faster. You remain centered even when outcomes are uncertain. The inner state also determines boundaries. When you feel worthy inside, you do not tolerate what drains you. When you feel safe within yourself, you do not cling to what harms you. These changes happen naturally, without rehearsed confidence. Your behavior adjusts because your baseline has changed. This shift does not mean effort disappears. It means effort becomes aligned. You still take action, but the action is guided by clarity instead of pressure. You no longer chase every possibility. You recognize what resonates and what doesn't. This discernment saves energy and attracts better results. The outer world is highly responsive to consistency. When your inner state is stable, your signals are clear. Mixed signals come from mixed inner states. Clarity inside creates clarity outside. People respond differently. Opportunities present themselves differently. Even challenges change shape because you meet them from a grounded place. When you understand that your inner state is the foundation, you stop blaming circumstances. You stop waiting for permission from the outside. You begin to cultivate stillness, awareness, and alignment internally, knowing that every shift there echoes outward, shaping experiences without force, without constant effort, without chasing outcomes, allowing life to reorganize itself around a center that is no longer dependent on struggle or validation. Letting go of control feels threatening to the mind because control has been mistaken for safety. The mind believes that if it stops managing every detail, something will fall apart. This belief was learned through moments of uncertainty, loss, or unpredictability. Over time, control became a habit, not a choice. It shaped how decisions were made, how relationships were handled, and how the future was imagined. Control creates the illusion of power, but it also creates constant tension. Every attempt to control an outcome tightens the body and narrows perception. You become focused on preventing what you fear instead of allowing what you need. This tension blocks flow. Life begins to feel heavy because every step requires mental force. Flow is not laziness. It is intelligent movement without resistance. When you let go of control, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are releasing the need to dominate every outcome. This shift allows you to respond instead of react. Response comes from awareness. Reaction comes from fear. When control loosens, the nervous system relaxes. The body stops bracing against imagined threats. Breathing deepens. The mind becomes clearer. In this state, intuition becomes accessible. You start sensing timing rather than forcing action. You recognize when to move and when to pause. This sensitivity creates alignment. Letting go of control also changes how you relate to uncertainty. Instead of seeing uncertainty as danger, you begin to see it as space. Space for possibilities you could not plan. Space for outcomes beyond your limited perspective. Control limits life to what the mind can predict. Release opens life to what the mind could never design. Many people fear letting go because they think it means losing direction. In truth, direction becomes clearer. When the noise of overthinking fades, subtle signals become noticeable. You notice what feels right instead of what looks correct. Decisions feel lighter because they are not burdened by fear of failure. Damaladin happens when actions are in harmony with inner clarity. This harmony cannot be forced. It emerges when resistance dissolves. When you stop pushing against life, life begins to move with you. This cooperation creates momentum that feels natural instead of exhausting control, often shows up as attachment to outcomes. You decide how something must happen and when. This attachment creates disappointment because reality rarely follows mental timelines. Letting go does not mean you stop having intentions. It means you stop demanding specific forms. Intention sets direction. Attachment creates tension. When attachment fades, patience grows. You trust the process because you are no longer measuring worth by immediate results. You understand that timing is part of intelligence. Rushing disrupts alignment. Waiting with awareness strengthens it. Letting go of control also transforms relationships. You stop trying to manage how others think or feel. You communicate more honestly and listen more openly. Conflict reduces because you are no longer defending an image. You allow people to be as they are, and this creates respect. As control dissolves, self-trust increases. You realize that you can handle what arises without micromanaging life. This trust is quiet but powerful. It removes the need for constant reassurance. You become steady in uncertainty. Flow becomes your default state. You act when needed and rest when needed. Effort is balanced with ease. Life feels responsive instead of resistant. Opportunities appear through connection rather than chase. You move with situations instead of against them, guided by clarity rather than fear, allowing alignment to shape outcomes naturally, freeing energy that was trapped in control, and opening a path where life unfolds with cooperation, timing, and effortless direction. Letting go of control feels threatening to the mind because control has been mistaken for safety. The mind believes that if it stops managing every detail, something will fall apart. This belief was learned through moments of uncertainty, loss, or unpredictability. Over time, control became a habit, not a choice. It shaped how decisions were made, how relationships were handled, and how the future was imagined. Control creates the illusion of power, but it also creates constant tension. Every attempt to control an outcome tightens the body and narrows perception. You become focused on preventing what you fear instead of allowing what you need. This tension blocks flow. Life begins to feel heavy because every step requires mental force. Flow is not laziness. It is intelligent movement without resistance. When you let go of control, you are not abandoning responsibility. You are releasing the need to dominate every outcome. This shift allows you to respond instead of react. Response comes from awareness. Reaction comes from fear. When control loosens, the nervous system relaxes. The body stops bracing against imagined threats. Breathing deepens. The mind becomes clearer. In this state, intuition becomes accessible. You start sensing timing rather than forcing action. You recognize when to move and when to pause. This sensitivity creates alignment. Letting go of control also changes how you relate to uncertainty. Instead of seeing uncertainty as danger, you begin to see it as space. Space for possibilities you could not plan. Space for outcomes beyond your limited perspective. Control limits life to what the mind can predict. Release opens life to what the mind could never design. Many people fear letting go because they think it means losing direction. In truth, direction becomes clearer. When the noise of overthinking fades, subtle signals become noticeable. You notice what feels right instead of what looks correct. Decisions feel lighter because they are not burdened by fear of failure. Alignment happens when actions are in harmony with inner clarity. This harmony cannot be forced. It emerges when resistance dissolves. When you stop pushing against life, life begins to move with you. This cooperation creates momentum that feels natural instead of exhausting control, often shows up as attachment to outcomes. You decide how something must happen and when. This attachment creates disappointment because reality rarely follows mental timelines. Letting go does not mean you stop having intentions. It means you stop demanding specific forms. Intention sets direction. Attachment creates tension. When attachment fades, patience grows. You trust the process because you are no longer measuring worth by immediate results. You understand that timing is part of intelligence. Rushing disrupts alignment. Waiting with awareness strengthens it. Letting go of control also transforms relationships. You stop trying to manage how others think or feel. You communicate more honestly and listen more openly. Conflict reduces because you are no longer defending an image. You allow people to be as they are, and this creates respect. As control dissolves, self-trust increases. You realize that you can handle what arises without micromanaging life. This trust is quiet but powerful. It removes the need for constant reassurance. You become steady in uncertainty. Flow becomes your default state. You act when needed and rest when needed. Effort is balanced with ease. Life feels responsive instead of resistant. Opportunities appear through connection rather than chase. You move with situations instead of against them, guided by clarity rather than fear, allowing alignment to shape outcomes naturally, freeing energy that was trapped in control, and opening a path where life unfolds with cooperation, timing, and effortless direction tonight. Remember this: you were never meant to fight your way into a better life. The struggle you've been carrying was never a requirement for growth. It was a misunderstanding of how change truly happens. Real transformation begins when you stop forcing and start allowing, when effort gives way to awareness and control softens into trust. As you rest, your mind learns in silence. As you release resistance, your inner state reorganizes. As repetition settles into the subconscious, old patterns lose their authority without confrontation. Nothing needs to be proven, fixed, or chased. Life responds not to pressure, but to alignment. When you change the way you listen, the way you rest, and the way you let go, your reactions change. When your reactions change, your experiences follow. This is how life shifts effortlessly, not through noise or urgency, but through quiet consistency and inner harmony. So tonight, choose stillness over struggle. Choose trust over control. Let sleep become the doorway, silence the teacher, and ease the guide. When you wake, you may not see fireworks, but you will feel steadier, clearer, and more aligned. And from that alignment, everything else begins to move. The brain is most open and impressionable in the first moments after waking. Yet, this window is ignored by most people. When you wake up, your mind has not fully reattached itself to yesterday's worries, identities, and emotional patterns. It is in a soft, unguarded state, similar to fresh clay before it hardens. Whatever you introduce into this state becomes a foundation. If the first thing you do is panic, rush, or consume noise, the brain quickly locks into survival mode. But if the first moments are calm and intentional, the brain begins the day organized instead of reactive. Neuroscience shows that during this early period, the boundary between the conscious and subconscious mind is thinner. This means beliefs, attitudes, and emotional tones pass through more easily. That is why mornings often decide the emotional direction of the entire day. A rushed morning trains the brain to expect pressure. A chaotic morning teaches the brain to stay alert for threats. Over time, these patterns harden into personality traits, not because they are true, but because they are repeated. When you wake up and immediately reach for your phone, the brain learns that external stimulation is more important than internal awareness. Notifications become commands. The mind becomes trained to react before it can choose. This weakens self-control and strengthens anxiety loops. Each morning this happens, the brain reinforces the belief that peace is unavailable unless the outside world approves or entertains you. In contrast, when you delay stimulation, even for a few minutes, the brain learns patience. Sitting up slowly, breathing deeply, and allowing thoughts to pass without engagement teaches the mind that it does not need to chase every impulse. This retrains the nervous system from urgency to stability. Over time, the brain becomes less triggered because it no longer expects chaos at the start of the day. The thoughts you entertain in the morning quietly define your self-image. If your first thoughts are complaints, regrets, or fear, the brain accepts these as identity signals. It begins to search for evidence to support them throughout the day. But when your first thoughts are neutral or grounded, the brain stays open instead of defensive. It becomes observant rather than judgmental. Many people try to reprogram their thinking through motivation later in the day, but by then the brain is already exhausted and reinforced by repetition. Morning patterns bypass resistance. They work because the mind has not yet built its walls. This is why small morning rituals are more powerful than dramatic evening promises. Even posture matters in the morning. How you sit up, how you breathe, how you move sends information to the brain about confidence and readiness. A collapsed posture trains helplessness. A steady posture trains self-trust. The brain does not argue with repetition, it obeys it. When mornings are treated with intention, the brain stops being a battlefield. It becomes a training ground. Instead of fighting negative thoughts all day, you prevent them from forming their momentum. This is not force. This is alignment. The brain learns through exposure, not effort. The first moments after waking are not about achievement. They are about orientation. You are teaching your brain what kind of day this will be, what kind of person you are being today, what kind of world you are stepping into. When you consistently choose calm over chaos in these moments, the brain slowly rewires itself to expect clarity instead of stress, presence instead of panic, direction instead of drift silence, and stillness are not empty spaces. They are environments where the mind regains its authority. In a world that constantly demands attention, the brain becomes conditioned to noise. Sounds, opinions, notifications, and conversations begin to dictate inner direction. Over time, the mind forgets how to remain centered without external input. Silence in the morning interrupts this conditioning and reminds the brain that it can exist without being stimulated or directed from the outside. When the body is still and the environment is quiet, the brain naturally slows its pace. Thoughts begin to rise, but without the pressure to respond to them. This is where authority is rebuilt. Authority is not control through force, it is clarity through awareness. The brain starts to notice patterns instead of being trapped inside them. A thought appears, and instead of becoming a command, it becomes an observation. This single shift changes how the mind relates to emotion, fear, and desire. Stillness exposes mental habits that are usually hidden by activity. When everything stops, impatience surfaces. Restlessness becomes visible. The urge to move, check, speak, or distract reveals how dependent the brain has become on stimulation. This discomfort is not a problem, it is feedback. The brain is showing you its conditioning. By staying still instead of escaping, you teach the nervous system that discomfort does not require action. In silence, the brain begins to regulate itself. Breathing deepens naturally. Heart rate slows. The body exits survival mode. When this state is practiced daily, the brain rewires its baseline. Calm stops being an occasional experience and starts becoming a default setting. This directly affects decision-making, emotional responses, and perception throughout the day. Silence also weakens the dominance of internal noise. Many people believe their thoughts are who they are because they never experience space between thoughts. Stillness creates that space. When thoughts slow down, the brain realizes it does not need to follow every narrative it produces. This realization reduces identification with fear-based thinking. The mind stops acting as a dictator and starts functioning as a tool. Morning silence is especially powerful because the mind has not yet absorbed the world's expectations. There is no performance required, no roles to play, no identities to defend. In this state, awareness is clean. The brain is not reacting to memory or anticipation, it is simply present. This presence sharpens perception and strengthens inner direction. Stillness trains patience at a neurological level. By remaining unmoving, you teach the brain that it can survive without constant novelty. This increases emotional endurance. situations that once triggered irritation or anxiety lose their intensity because the brain has learned to sit with sensation instead of escaping it. Authority grows when the brain no longer seeks permission from the outside to feel complete. Silence removes comparison, validation, and pressure. It brings the mind back to its own center. From this center, choices become intentional instead of habitual. Reactions slow down, responses become measured. Over time, silence rewires the brain's relationship with power. Power stops being loud, forceful, or reactive. It becomes quiet, steady, and grounded. A mind that can sit in stillness without discomfort cannot be easily shaken by chaos, criticism, or uncertainty. This is not withdrawal from life, it is preparation to engage with life without losing balance. When silence and stillness are practiced consistently, the brain learns that peace is not something to chase, but something to return to within itself. Small discipline in the morning reshapes the brain more deeply than dramatic effort later in the day because it works with the mind instead of against it. The brain responds to consistency, not intensity. When you choose a simple disciplined action right after waking, you send a clear signal that direction comes before desire. This signal, repeated daily, slowly reorganizes how the brain prioritizes comfort, effort, and control. Discipline does not begin with force. It begins with agreement. When you make a small commitment in the morning and keep it, the brain records evidence of reliability. This builds self-trust at a neurological level. The mind starts to believe that instructions will be followed, not negotiated. Over time, this reduces internal resistance because the brain no longer expects inconsistency from itself. Many people associate discipline with punishment or restriction, which creates inner conflict. Morning discipline, when kept small, avoids this conflict. It might be making the bed carefully, drinking water before anything else, or sitting upright for a few minutes. These actions are not impressive, but they are powerful because they are completed before excuses gain momentum. The brain learns that action does not require motivation. Each small act of discipline strengthens the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for decision-making and impulse control. When this area is activated early, it remains more active throughout the day. This is why people who start their mornings with order often experience fewer emotional spikes and better focus later. The brain carries the tone of the first actions forward. Discipline also trains the brain to tolerate delay. When you choose effort over ease in the morning, the mind learns that discomfort is temporary and manageable. This reduces avoidance behaviors. Tasks that once felt heavy become lighter because the brain has practiced stepping into mild resistance without panic. Your inner strength is built quietly. The brain does not grow stronger from grand declarations, but from repeated follow-through. Each time you complete a small disciplined act, the brain releases subtle reinforcement chemicals that associate effort with stability rather than stress. Over time, this rewiring changes how the brain interprets challenge. What once felt threatening starts to feel familiar. Morning discipline also reduces decision fatigue. When certain actions are non-negotiable, the brain conserves energy. It no longer debates whether to act. This clarity frees mental space for creativity, problem-solving, and awareness. The mind becomes less scattered because it is not constantly bargaining with itself. There is also an identity shift that occurs. The brain begins to register you as someone who acts deliberately. This identity is not built through affirmations, but through behavior. When behavior is consistent, the brain adjusts self-image to match it. Confidence grows not from success, but from alignment between intention and action. As discipline strengthens, emotional regulation improves. The brain becomes less reactive because it is used to choosing response over impulse. This does not make a person rigid, it makes them grounded. flexibility actually increases because the brain is no longer controlled by immediate cravings or emotional swings. Small discipline in the morning sets a baseline of order. Even if the rest of the day becomes unpredictable, the brain remembers that it began with structure. This memory creates stability under pressure. Stress does not disappear, but it no longer dominates. Over time, inner strength stops feeling like effort. It becomes a natural state. The brain no longer asks whether it should do what is necessary, it simply does it. This is how small disciplined actions, repeated quietly, rewire the brain for resilience, self-respect, and calm power without noise or force. What the mind consumes in the early hours quietly programs the direction of thought for the entire day. The brain does not process information in isolation. It absorbs tone, emotion, and rhythm along with content. When the first inputs are chaotic, negative, or sensational, the brain shifts into a defensive and scattered state. It begins to scan for problems, conflicts, and threats, not because they are present, but because it has been trained to expect them. Morning consumption shapes perception. Words, images, and sounds act as instructions. If the brain is fed urgency, it creates urgency. If it is fed fear, it sharpens fear. Many people believe they are reacting to life, when in reality, they are reacting to what they consumed hours earlier. The brain simply follows the pattern it was given. Clean input is not about positivity or denial. It is about clarity. When the brain is exposed to simple, grounded information in the morning, it stays organized. It does not fragment its attention. It does not chase stimulation. Instead, it moves with intention. This reduces mental fatigue and emotional reactivity throughout the day. Noise in the morning weakens focus. Scrolling through random content trains the brain to jump rapidly between ideas. This creates shallow thinking and restlessness. Over time, the brain loses its ability to stay with one thought long enough to understand it deeply. This is why many people feel busy but unfocused. Their minds are full, but their awareness is thin. When you choose what enters your mind early, you reclaim authority. Even a few minutes of reading, reflection, or listening to steady language teaches the brain to move at a slower, more deliberate pace. This pace allows thoughts to connect instead of collide. The mind becomes less reactive and more coherent. Emotional content has a stronger impact in the morning because the brain has not yet built emotional defenses. Dramatic news, arguments, or comparison-based content imprint deeply. These imprints influence mood, confidence, and behavior long after the content is forgotten. The brain remembers the feeling even when it forgets the source. Clean input also strengthens self-awareness. When the brain is not overwhelmed, it can notice internal signals. Hunger, tension, excitement, and intuition become clearer. This improves decision-making because choices are made from awareness instead of impulse. What you repeatedly consume becomes familiar, and familiarity becomes comfort. If chaos is familiar, peace feels uncomfortable. This is why many people feel uneasy in silence. Their brains have been trained to equate stimulation with safety. By choosing clean input in the morning, you slowly reverse this conditioning. Calm begins to feel normal. The quality of thought determines the quality of action. A mind filled with noise struggles to act with precision. A mind fed with clarity moves with confidence. Clean input is not about controlling the world. It is about controlling what shapes your internal environment. Morning consumption also affects self-talk. The brain mirrors the language it hears. Harsh, critical content increases self-criticism. Balanced language encourages balanced thinking. Over time, the tone of inner dialogue shifts to match the tone of early input. This practice is subtle but powerful. You may not notice immediate changes, but the brain is always learning. Each morning, it takes notes. It observes what you allow and what you refuse. From these observations, it builds patterns. When you protect the mind in the early hours, you reduce the need for recovery later. Less damage means less repair. The brain stays clearer, calmer, and more directed, not because life is easier, but because the internal environment is no longer polluted by unnecessary noise. Focused presence is a skill the brain must relearn after years of distraction. Modern life trains the mind to split attention, jump between tasks, and seek constant stimulation. Over time, this fragments awareness and weakens the brain's ability to stay with one experience fully. When presence is lost, effort increases. People try harder but achieve less because the mind is never completely engaged. The brain becomes powerful not through speed but through depth. When attention is concentrated on a single action, neural pathways strengthen more efficiently. This is why a few minutes of deep focus can produce more clarity than hours of scattered effort. Presence organizes mental energy. Instead of leaking in multiple directions, it moves with precision. Most exhaustion is not physical, it is mental leakage. When the brain constantly shifts focus, it spends energy restarting tasks rather than completing them. This creates the feeling of being busy but unproductive. Focused presence eliminates this waste. The brain settles, and in that settling, strength emerges. Presence also changes the relationship with time. When attention is divided, time feels rushed. When attention is whole, time feels spacious. This does not slow productivity, it improves it. The brain no longer feels chased by deadlines because it is anchored in the current action. Emotionally, presence stabilizes the mind. Anxiety thrives on future projection. Regret feeds on past replay. When the brain is trained to stay with what is happening now, these loops weaken. The mind stops borrowing stress from imagined outcomes. Emotional reactions soften because they are no longer fueled by mental narratives. Focused presence also sharpens perception. Small details become visible. Tone, timing, and subtle signals are noticed. This increases intelligence without effort. The brain becomes more responsive and less reactive. Decisions improve because they are based on observation rather than assumption. Training presence does not require long sessions. It begins with ordinary actions done completely. Drinking water without distraction, walking without planning, listening without preparing a reply. These simple practices teach the brain to stay. Each time you resist the urge to multitask, you strengthen neural circuits related to attention control. The brain initially resists presence because distraction has become comfortable. Restlessness appears. The urge to check, move, or escape arises. This resistance is a sign of conditioning, not failure. By staying anyway, the brain learns that stillness and focus are safe. Over time, presence reduces the need for excessive effort. When attention is clear, action becomes efficient. The mind stops forcing results and starts aligning with the task. This reduces burnout and increases satisfaction. Focused presence also affects self-respect. When you give full attention to what you are doing, you communicate value to yourself. The brain registers this as dignity. This quietly shifts identity. You no longer feel scattered or rushed. You feel composed. Relationships improve as well. Presence allows genuine listening. Without internal distraction, connection deepens naturally. The brain releases tension when it feels fully engaged rather than divided. A present mind is difficult to manipulate. It does not react immediately to provocation. It pauses, observes, and chooses. This creates inner power without aggression. Over time, the brain learns that focus is not strain, it is ease. Effort decreases as presence increases. You stop pushing through life and start moving with it. This is why focused presence becomes more powerful than constant effort. It aligns the mind instead of exhausting it, allowing clarity, strength, and effectiveness to emerge naturally from attention itself. Detachment from outcomes is not indifference, it is a refined form of mental strength. The brain naturally seeks control, and control is often mistaken for safety. From an early age, the mind learns to attach its sense of worth to results, approval, and visible success. Over time, this attachment conditions the nervous system to treat uncertainty as a threat. Detachment retrains the brain to stay steady even when results are unknown. When the brain is attached to outcomes, it constantly projects into the future. It rehearses success or failure before either occurs. This creates tension because the mind is living in a reality that does not yet exist. Stress is not caused by effort, but by expectation. Detachment removes this added weight. The brain returns to the present task instead of the imagined result. Attachment narrows perception. When the mind is fixated on a specific outcome, it ignores alternative paths and signals. Creativity decreases, flexibility weakens. The brain becomes rigid because it is trying to force reality to match a mental image. Detachment opens perception. When the mind releases insistence, it sees more clearly and adapts more easily. Emotionally, attachment amplifies reactions. Success brings temporary relief, while failure feels personal. The brain equates outcomes with identity. Detachment dissolves this equation. Results become feedback rather than verdicts. This reduces emotional volatility and builds resilience. Practicing detachment does not reduce motivation. It purifies it. Action becomes driven by alignment instead of fear. The brain learns to act fully without clinging to reward. This creates a steady flow of energy that is not dependent on praise or recognition. When outcomes are released, the nervous system relaxes. The body no longer braces for judgment. This relaxation improves performance. Muscles move more freely, thoughts flow more smoothly. The brain functions better because it is not under self-imposed pressure. Detachment also changes how the brain processes failure. Instead of triggering shame or avoidance, mistakes are integrated as information. Learning accelerates because the mind is open rather than defensive. The brain stops protecting an image and starts refining skill. Many people believe detachment means lowering standards. In reality, it strengthens consistency. When emotions are not tied to results, effort becomes sustainable. The brain no longer burns energy on anxiety spikes. It invests that energy into precision and presence. Attachment creates fear of loss. Detachment creates stability. When the mind no longer fears losing a specific outcome, it becomes harder to manipulate through pressure or comparison. Inner peace increases because worth is no longer outsourced. This practice also affects relationships. When expectations are released, connection becomes cleaner. The brain stops demanding validation and starts offering presence. This reduces conflict and increases trust. Over time, detachment rewires how the brain defines success. Success becomes effort with integrity rather than outcome with applause. This shift brings quiet confidence. The mind no longer needs constant reassurance because it is grounded in process. Letting go of outcomes does not mean passivity. It means engaging fully while remaining internally free. The brain learns that it can give its best without clinging. This freedom creates clarity. Decisions become less emotional and more precise. As detachment deepens, anxiety loses its grip. The future no longer dominates attention. The present becomes sufficient. The brain settles into a rhythm where action and acceptance coexist. In this state, peace is not dependent on results, and effort flows without resistance, allowing life to unfold without inner struggle or fear of what comes next. In the end, rewiring the brain is not about forcing change or becoming someone else overnight. It is about understanding how the mind learns and gently guiding it in a new direction, one morning at a time. Every habit discussed is small, simple, and quiet, yet together they reshape the internal environment where thoughts, emotions, and decisions are formed. When mornings are approached with awareness, the brain stops reacting to life and starts responding to it. Silence restores authority. Discipline builds trust within the self. Clean input protects clarity. Focused presence gathers scattered energy. Detachment from outcomes dissolves fear. None of these practices demand perfection. They require consistency. The brain is always listening. It listens to how you wake up, how you breathe, how you choose, and how you respond when no one is watching. Over time, it adapts to what you repeatedly show it. Stress fades not because life becomes easier, but because the mind becomes steadier. This is how real change happens, not through motivation, but through alignment. Not through control, but through awareness. When you commit to shaping your mornings, you are not just changing habits, you are changing identity. And as the mind changes, behavior follows, perception sharpens, and life begins to move with less resistance and more clarity.